happened to BRICS during the Trump administration. The future of BRICS under Donald Trump is questionable for various reasons. Trump has already said that he will impose severe tariffs on BRICS member countries if they pursue the creation of a new currency to rival the US dollar. Trump has declared that BRICS nations must assure the US that they will not create a new currency or face 100% tariffs on their goods. This statement underscores his administration's hardline stance against any moves that could undermine the dollar's dominance in global trade. Trump has openly positioned himself as an adversary to this coalition, indicating that he views their potential shift away from the dollar as a direct challenge to U.S. economic power. This position needs to be understood in the wider context of what is actually happening to the three major nations within the BRICS coalition, namely Russia, China and India. First, there is Russia. The ongoing war in Ukraine and sanctions have had a serious negative effect on the Russian economy. By December 2024, inflation in Russia reached 9.6%, with some estimates suggesting that the actual perceived inflation could be as high as 16%. This has led to a substantial increase in household expenditures, which rose by 19 to 21% compared to the previous year. The unemployment rate has plummeted to around 2.3%, but this is misleading, because it reflects a severe labor shortage, rather than a robust job market. The demand for labor has surged, yet the supply has diminished due to emigration and reduced migrant inflows. Russia's economy is increasingly characterized by a divide between the military-industrial sector and the civilian economy. While defense-related wages have surged, public sector salaries lag significantly behind inflation, contributing to rising income inequality. This divide between Russia's war economy and its civilian economy is becoming increasingly pronounced, reflecting significant economic imbalances, driven by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The war economy has led to substantial increases in wages within military-related sectors, with reports indicating salary boosts of 30 to 60% for workers in defense factories. In contrast, public sector salaries have lagged behind inflation, contributing to rising income inequality. Inflation reached 9.6% by December 2024, with perceived inflation possibly as high as 16%. This inflation disproportionately affects the civilian population, as rising costs deplete household resources, while military spending remains insulated from these pressures. The war economy is draining the labor market, exacerbated by the emigration of anti-war workers and reduced migrant inflows. This has created a labor shortage that primarily benefits military production at the expense of civilian industries. Investment is increasingly funneled into military production rather than civilian sectors, leading to a stagnation in growth for non-military industries. The Kremlin's focus on sustaining military operations has resulted in a dual-track economy, where war-related sectors thrive, while civilian markets struggle. The prioritization of military spending has led to the depletion of civilian resources, with economic warfare tactics forcing civilians to bear the brunt of costs associated with the war effort. This dynamic mirrors historical patterns observed in previous global conflicts, where civilian welfare deteriorated, as resources were redirected towards military needs. The ongoing imbalance poses long-term risks for Russia's economic stability. As military production continues to overshadow civilian economic needs, the potential for a humanitarian crisis grows, alongside increased crime rates due to social unrest stemming from economic disparities. There is also the level of poverty in Russia. As of 2023, 9.3% of the population, 13.5 million people, lives below the poverty line. Some indicators suggest that this figure could be as high as 20 million people. There are also the working poor, whose average earning is as little as 14,564 rubles per month, or $140 per month. From 2020 to mid-2024, inflation rates reached approximately 34.4%, with the cost of essential goods rising even more sharply. This economic strain has particularly affected the poorest segments of society. Sberbank is the largest financial institution in Russia and a major player in the global banking sector. German Graf, CEO of Sberbank, stressed recently that the Russian economy is experiencing a slowdown, particularly in housing construction and investment. Graf noted that inflation is currently more than double the government's target of 4%, exacerbated by high spending, related to the ongoing war in Ukraine and Western sanctions. Therefore, the Central Bank of Russia has raised interest rates to a two-decade high of 21%, in an effort to combat inflation. This has led to concerns among business leaders, who argue that such high rates hinder industrial growth and could drive the economy into stagflation, a scenario characterized by stagnant growth and high inflation. There are indications that capital investment has sharply declined, with some sectors linked to military production being the only areas experiencing growth. The broader economy is facing reduced investment and increasing corporate bankruptcies as businesses struggle with rising borrowing costs. Analysts predict that economic growth will slow significantly in 2025, with estimates ranging between 0.5% and 1.5%. This marks a stark contrast to previous growth rates, and raises concerns about potential recessionary conditions. Business leaders are increasingly vocal about their dissatisfaction with the central bank's policies, calling for a re-evaluation of interest rates, and monetary policy coordination with the government. There is a growing sentiment that maintaining high interest rates is counterproductive to fostering economic recovery. Plus, oil and gas revenues account for 30 to 50% of Russia's federal budget over the past decade. In 2019, the energy sector contributed up to 25% of Russia's GDP and accounted for 60% of exports. More recent data shows that in the second quarter of 2024, the oil and gas industry accounted for 16.7% of Russia's GDP. On January 10, 2025, the White House announced severe sanctions targeting Russian oil producers, Gazprom Neft and Surgutneftegaz, as well as blacklisting almost 200 Russian ships. These sanctions are likely to have very severe consequences for Russia. The sanctions are expected to severely hurt Russian oil exports, particularly to China and India, its largest buyers. Many of the sanctioned tankers have been used to ship oil to these countries, and their blacklisting will create significant logistical challenges. Global oil prices have already risen in response to the sanctions, with Brent crude climbing above $81 a barrel. This increase reflects market expectations of tighter global supply. Chinese independent refiners may need to cut refining output, while India's crude imports from Russia, which accounted for 36% of its total imports in the first 11 months of 2024, will be greatly affected. China and India may be forced to seek alternative oil supplies from the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas, potentially boosting prices and freight costs. The sanctions are expected to create more pressure on the ruble, increase inflation, and cut into Russia's budget revenues. Experts believe these sanctions will be a painful blow for Russia, sidelining important transportation infrastructure, and potentially weakening the Russian economy. The Trump administration, thus, will have another very potent weapon to hold against Russia, as it moves forward on ending the war in Ukraine. How much will Russia have to concede? We will have to wait and see. Sanctions are a very powerful weapon and bargaining chip in the hands of the United States. Overall, these developments signal a precarious situation for the Russian economy, with mounting pressures from both internal policy decisions and external geopolitical factors. President Putin will have to take some very tough and even unpopular decisions, as he works to save his country. Overall, these developments signal a precarious situation for the Russian economy, with mounting pressures from both internal policy decisions and external geopolitical factors. Sanctions and the war in Ukraine have taken a serious toll on the Russian economy. Russia will need America to end the war in Ukraine and then cancel the thousands of sanctions, which are strangling it. Then, there is China. China's economy is also facing very serious challenges. China's GDP growth has decelerated to around 4.6% in the third quarter of 2024, falling short of the government's target of 5% for the year. This marks a continuation of disappointing economic performance, as it is the second consecutive quarter where growth has not met expectations. Over the past few years, annual GDP growth has hovered just under 5%, with fixed investments significantly declining from 9.9% in 2021 to 3.2% in 2023. The real estate market is in a severe downturn, with many developers defaulting on loans and an estimated 65 million housing units remaining unoccupied. This collapse has not only affected consumer confidence, but also contributed to a broader economic malaise. As housing prices decline and projects are abandoned, consumer spending has decreased, further exacerbating economic troubles. Surveys indicate a significant drop in the number of citizens who feel wealthier compared to previous years. Analysts argue that China's reliance on investment-driven growth and exports has reached its limits. The economy's unbalanced model, heavily dependent on real estate and cheap labor, is no longer sustainable, without major reforms. Local governments have accrued substantial debts, due to off-balance sheet borrowing for infrastructure projects. Many are now struggling financially, which could lead to reduced public investment and services. Increasing tensions with the United States, including tariffs on Chinese goods, are further complicating China's economic landscape. These geopolitical factors contribute to uncertainty and could hinder potential recovery efforts. As economic conditions worsen, the ruling Chinese Communist Party may face increasing political pressure. Economic dissatisfaction can lead to social unrest, challenging the party's grip on power. A declining economy could erode public support, as citizens demand accountability and improvements in living standards. High youth unemployment rates, currently around 20%, are likely to persist, leading to a generation of disillusioned young people. This demographic challenge could have long-lasting effects on consumer behavior and social stability, as frustrated youth may become less engaged in the workforce and society. Many local governments are struggling with debt due to off-balance sheet borrowing. Without significant fiscal reforms, they may have to cut essential services and infrastructure investments, further impacting local economies and public welfare. With consumers holding back on spending due to economic uncertainty, domestic consumption, which is crucial for recovery, may stagnate. This trend could lead to a vicious cycle of reduced economic activity and further declines in consumer confidence. China plays a critical role in global supply chains. A sustained economic downturn could disrupt production and logistics, affecting companies worldwide that rely on Chinese manufacturing. Industries, such as technology and automotive, could see significant impacts as demand from China wanes. As China seeks to stabilize its economy, it may prioritize trade relationships with neighboring countries, while also facing increasing tensions with the US and other Western nations. The contraction in China's economy may lead to a scaling back of the Belt and Road Initiative, which funds infrastructure projects in developing nations. Countries reliant on Chinese investment could face economic hardships if these projects are delayed or cancelled, leading to increased poverty and social unrest in those regions. Projections indicate that China's GDP growth could decline further, potentially dropping to 3% by 2030 and 2% by 2040, reflecting structural issues such as an aging population and low productivity growth. This slowdown mirrors trends seen in other mature economies that have faced similar demographic challenges. Given China's significant contribution to global growth, over one-third, its economic troubles are likely to cast a shadow over global economic prospects. Analysts have already downgraded forecasts for global growth due to China's slowdown, indicating potential volatility in international markets. Despite its achievements, poverty remains severe in rural areas. In 2018, the extreme poverty rate in rural China was 5 times higher than in urban regions. The current national poverty line has not been updated since its establishment in 2011, leading to concerns that it may not accurately reflect modern living costs and conditions. There is also significant income inequality within China. For instance, while residents in eastern provinces like Shanghai enjoy much higher disposable incomes, around $10,052 annually, those in western regions like Gansu earn significantly less, approximately $2,771. Officially, about 600 million people still live on a monthly income of barely 1,000 yuan, $154, insufficient for basic urban living expenses. The long-term consequences of China's economic troubles are likely to create a complex interplay of domestic challenges and international ramifications that will require careful monitoring and strategic responses from both policymakers within China and stakeholders globally. Which means that China can ill afford to antagonize the United States. Finally, there is India. India is currently grappling with significant economic challenges that have raised concerns among policymakers and citizens alike. The situation is characterized by several interrelated issues, including high inflation, wage stagnation, and growing inequality. Inflation in India has reached alarming levels, significantly impacting the purchasing power of consumers. The cost of goods has surged, with a notable increase in profit margins for industrialists, which has doubled in recent years. For example, what used to cost 100 rupees in 2015, now costs 36 rupees in profits to the owners, indicating a severe erosion of consumer capacity to spend. This inflationary pressure has been attributed to government policies perceived as favoring large conglomerates, leading to monopolistic practices in various sectors. Wages have stagnated over the past decade, with real wages failing to grow, despite rising living costs. This stagnation is linked to a decline in productivity among laborers, which further restricts household income and consumption growth. Reports indicate that many workers can afford less today than they could 10 years ago, which has contributed to a shrinking middle class. The gap between the wealthy and the poor in India has widened considerably. The richest 1% now hold approximately 40% of the country's wealth, while the bottom 50% possess only 6%. This disparity is evident in urban centers, where extreme wealth coexists with extreme poverty. India faces a persistent jobs crisis, with unemployment rates rising and many educated youths unable to find suitable employment. The share of educated individuals among the unemployed has increased significantly, indicating a mismatch between education and available job opportunities. Initiatives like Make in India, aimed at boosting manufacturing jobs, have not yielded the expected results, leading to widespread dissatisfaction among people. India's economy has also been hindered by structural problems, such as trade imbalances and fiscal deficits. Despite being one of the largest economies globally, India's per capita income ranks low compared to other nations. As of 2023, India's per capita net national income is estimated at approximately $2,497 in nominal terms. In 2022, the per capita income was around $2,393. In terms of nominal GDP per capita, India ranks 158th out of 200 countries. When considering purchasing power parity, PPP, India ranks 125th globally. India also heavily relies on foreign investment to address current account deficits, which makes India vulnerable to global economic shifts. India is also a net importer of energy. India is the world's third-largest net importer of crude oil, importing over 80% of its crude oil consumption. India is also a major importer of liquefied natural gas, LNG, being the fourth-largest importer globally. As of 2020, India's overall energy import dependency was around 49.93%, up from 37.39% in 2006. The Indian rupee has experienced significant declines recently, hitting a new record low against the US dollar. As of January 13, 2025, the rupee fell to 86.5575 to the dollar, marking a decrease of 0.7% in a single day, which is the largest drop since early 2023. This decline is attributed to several factors. Strong U.S. jobs data has dampened expectations for further interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve, leading to a stronger dollar. The addition of 286,000 U.S. jobs last month and a decrease in the unemployment rate to 4.1% have contributed to this sentiment. A surge in oil prices has particularly affected India's economy, as it is a net oil importing country. The increase in crude prices adds pressure on the rupee and exacerbates the trade deficit. The rupee's fall coincided with a significant drop in the BSE Sensex, which tumbled over 1,000 points on the same day. This reflects broader market concerns about economic stability and investor confidence. Analysts predict that the rupee may continue to face downward pressure, with some forecasts suggesting it could fall past 90 rupees per dollar this year, if current trends persist. The Reserve Bank of India is expected to adjust its approach to currency management amid these challenges, particularly as foreign fund outflows and slowing economic growth weigh on the currency. Overall, the current economic landscape indicates that the rupee's depreciation is likely to continue unless there are significant changes in both domestic and global economic conditions. Thus, like Russia and China, India has little possibility of posing a challenge to American dominance. This raises the obvious question: what future can BRICS have, as an alternative to the American economic model, if the strongest three economies within this coalition are each facing difficult, if not dire, challenges? Trump's approach is a simple one: to rid the world of any dreams it may have about an economic future outside the US dollar. Which country will actually challenge him, and succeed? And is arm twisting, really, a winning strategy for America?